Want to tell the Rebbe the words of the new song that we're singing with Mashiach, right? So I'm just going to read him. Am Yisrael, have no fear. Mashiach will be here this year. We want Mashiach now. We don't want to wait. Okay? Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, oh yeah, Am Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be this year. Am Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be here this year. We want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we don't want to wait. We want Mashiach now, Mashiach now, we don't want to wait. Am Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be here this year. Am Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be here this year. We want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we don't want to wait. We want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we don't want to wait. Hey!
So welcome everyone, and welcome Wahid. So without any further ado, I think who better to introduce you than yourself, because I've talked with you a lot, but it's, everyone has their perceptions of other people, but only someone can really explain where they're coming from.
Where am I coming from? Well, I'm Wahid Azal. I am the founder and present Grand Sheikh of the Fatimiyya Sufi order, or the newer Fatimiyya Sufi order, which is basically a what you would call a 12er Shiite post-Islamic Bayani or Babi, Azali Babi initiatic order. The thrust of this order's doctrine is basically a revival of the Bayani or Azali Babi doctrine, but within a new and kind of a perennialist setting. Fundamentally, the divine feminine is the pivot upon which our doctrine revolves around. And we have a, like I mentioned, a perennialist perspective on that. So I have begun to speak of the eternal goddess, which is the term I'm using right on the book I'm working on, the book of the Tree of Hermes, which is my introduction to a system of tarot that I've developed that goes beyond the conventional system that we have of the Western tarot. In many ways, this book is going to be sort of a response to a lot of the tarot writing of the last 100, 200 years, particularly Aleister Crowley's Book of Thought, which I plan to really hammer at. So that is basically where I'm coming from. My last book was the completion of the Bayan that was begun by Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi, the Bab. I published the Arabic, my own Arabic translation and my own Arabic text of it late last year. The Persian text of it still remains to be published, which I plan to do in the next couple of years, and eventually a translation of it. But at the moment, all my focus is on writing up and finishing this book on the tarot, which hopefully in the next 2 years will be out.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, it's a lot of resonance with stuff that I'm finding kind of myself drawn to, like now as well. But something that is really interesting about the tarot. Have you seen? What's his name? I'm going to need to look up it. Have you seen the work of Torah in the Tarot? I think. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Oh yeah, yes. I haven't read it, but I know of it. Yeah.
Sorry, there's a little bit of static. What were we saying?
Yeah, I've heard of the book. Yeah, I haven't read the book, but I know of it. Yes, yes, I do. Yeah,
Yeah, oh, Stan Appel, I think that's the guy's name.
yeah,
But he's found a lot of interesting resonances with basically Jewish imagery in the was it Tarot de wait Fran Jean Noble de Marseille tarot deck.
yes, yeah.
But one second, there's a little bit of connection issues. Okay, yeah, here we're back. So but yeah, so what I figured we could talk about tonight. Oh, also just for anyone who's watching, I've also included links to Wahid's blog and to his YouTube channel, so you can check that out. He also has a Facebook that I always add that into the description if anyone watching this still uses Facebook. But sorry about the connection issues. I think it's on my side. Seems okay. Yeah, I'm connected again. I'm going to hop back in.
That's a much better connection now.
Yeah. Oh shoot. Okay. And then connected. Sorry about this. Yeah. So I think that might be it. Honestly, I'm not really sure. Here, I also need to make sure we have to manually close this on my phone because sometimes I've accidentally ended streams because I clicked on end stream rather than, and on the phone it kind of just collapses it all into one. But yeah, this is a live stream, but I could always edit it later, and then that I don't have these pesky interruptions. But so yeah. So what I figured we could talk about tonight is this concept of Memra, or the logos, English, the word. And it's something that I really feels become so sanitized, and so like I don't even know the word that you could use for it. I mean, type of gentrification or appropriation into this, like it's been rendered harmless to the patriarchy of monotheism. You know what I'm saying?
What is the memra? Is the grammar of memra? The word itself is feminine in Hebrew, right?
Yeah. So so what it is? So memra, it means, so it's like mim ra. So I'm trying to think of the Omer. So it's from the root amar. So me amra. So it's basically that which is said, or like but in this context, it's referring to that which is said by God. It's the word of God. You also have so this is another interesting thing. So you have Devar, you have the Devar, or it gets understood, within a Jewish concept as, Devar Adonai, or Devar, Yahweh. But basically, it's forcing this association with Yahweh, and you even see it similar in Proverbs. How it actually, I have it pulled up. Let me see. It's let's see. He created. So this is one of the things that I've become a lot more interested in all this since I've started learning. Well, I mean, I'm I mean, you never really stop learning since I started learning biblical Hebrew. And what I've learned is a lot of, I mean, not that I should be surprised. I always knew this about, actually, I mean, it was one of those things I kind of just took for granted that you have with Christian interpretations, which is true, but you also have it with Jewish interpretations, because a lot of people kind of forget that the form of Judaism that exists today, is really developed after the destruction or around the destruction of the temple, rather than, the form that returned from Babylon, or even, the Israelite tradition that preceded that.
Which is, I think in many ways is what's required. I've had this conversation with many Jews over the years. What exactly was the Israelite, religion that preceded the temple? And the archaeology is giving us some extremely fascinating answers. Like, these clay jars that they found back about 10, 15 years ago that actually made human-like depictions of Yahweh and his consort, the Asherah, which threw the world of archaeology, but also a lot of biblical scholarship on its head. But yeah, the Judaism that exists today and has existed for the past 2,000 years is the post-Second Temple, and primarily the doctrine of what initially at that time would have been the Pharisees, according to what the Gospel says. This was the faction that won out in representing the whole Jewish world. But we had other sects, the Nazarites, the various different Jewish sects. I mean, one of them that has been around even longer, the Samaritans, they're still around. So what Judaism is obviously not a monolith, contrary to what what the rabbinic tradition has tried to project for the last 2,000 years. But my interest is, as is yours, is the issue of the Asherah. Now, the word Asherah itself is very, very fascinating. How it ends up in Hebrew. There's been a lot of scholarship on this, because Asherah is basically a Hebrewisation of the Assyro-Babylonian Ishtar.
Ishara? Wait, who?
Yeah. So, which in one form was also being worshipped by the Canaanites.
Who did you say?
Ishtar.
So I've also heard an argument that it might have. So, and this is based on the association with cannabis primarily. But have you ever heard of have you ever heard of Ishara?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So like you have Ishara and then you have Ishtar, and they're two separate deities, and then they might be paralleled in Canaan as Asherah and Ashtart. But like,
just remember in antiquity, what happens a lot between different nations and cultures, that you often have these various deities syncretized into like one. And in late antiquity, this happens quite a lot. I mean, you have even forms of Asherah being fused with like Isis in around like a 4th, 5th century Common Era, before the Common Era. But it is obviously Asherah is a cognate from one of these Mesopotamian languages. I mean, Hebrew itself is technically a Mesopotamian language originally. So, but my fascination is that the early Israelites weren't constructing temple rites for the Asherah. They were worshiping the Asherah at trees. And this resonates very closely, for example, with what many sect of goddess worshippers in India today worship the goddess. They worship the goddess at trees. If you drive through India, you often see trees with all kinds of things hung under trees, effigies of the goddess, pictures, ribbons, flowers, that sort of thing. And it's almost identical to what the ancient Israelites, apparently from what we understand, were doing in their Asherah worship. And then for some reason, whoever wrote the book of Deuteronomy and Leviticus decided that this was a bad idea and prescribed the practice. But that this was a feature of the ancient Israelite religion is absolutely fascinating to me. Which means that what we understand today, or have understood today, in the last 2,000 years about what monotheism is is not exactly how it was understood by the ancients at all.
Definitely. And so, like, one thing that you said about this, syncretization or this, combination that was happening, I mean, you even see it with, Yahweh being combined with El. And ultimately, I think you could even argue that in a way, there's almost this type of, like, so, well, I'll actually get into it because you can see it described here. So, let's see. So here we have, I'll just read the translation, but this is wisdom that's speaking, I think. Yeah. So, Halo Chochma Tikra. So, like, this is wisdom speaking out. And then it also calls her Tfuna, which is connected to Bina. And so you also have some interesting theories on Chochma and Bina, which but yeah, so it's that. So you have its wisdom calling and understanding is yielding her voice. But yeah, could you share your thoughts on the two, or I guess technically the second and third Sefirot?
Yeah, well, this was the Geronese Kabbalists. These were a special group of them in Girona, in Spain, and another school that shows up following them during the late Italian Renaissance. They were actually claiming that the second Sephirah of the Sephirotic tree of life is actually Bina rather than Chokhmah. So they formulated the tree of life, at least in the top layers in the word of in the top world in Atzilut, completely the opposite. The Chokhmah is neither male nor female, but according to them, the female comes first, the female principle, as Bina. Then it is followed by Chokhmah. So this kind of, very interestingly enough, it kind of mimics a very similar scheme that was happening in certain schools of Gnosticism, where they were placing Sophia before Logos and talking about Sophia Logos. Like, I think it is one of them. They have a special name for this, the Sophia Logos, who is highest element or highest nature is feminine, and then it projects itself as male. Barabella or something like that. Yeah.
Barbello, yeah. Oh my God, this is like so connected to this one assignment I was completing before we started streaming. But yeah, so shoot, what was another thing that I think is really interesting? So here you have Keter, which you could connect with like the monad, or basically this like basically this like ungendered, unpotentiated, oneness. And then you have, this, which you have one that's feminine, one that's masculine. But what's interesting is that if you look at it in this context, so here you have chesed, which is understood as, and this is the thing that always kind of struck me as odd. So chesed, which is mercy or loving kindness, is associated with the masculine side, whereas the feminine side is associated with gevura or strength. So it almost seems like, and then you have, it almost seems like, so you have, was it like what should be male, female, and then male, and not because like victory is inherently male and surrender is inherently feminine. It's just within the context of like, receiving versus emitting, basically. And so within that context, I think it's interesting that this is understood as the male side, when like it almost seems like the whole thing could be flipped, like you're talking about. And if you look at it in that context, then basically if Bina is supposed to be here, then it's associated with loving kindness and victory, all things associated with the goddess. And then with the male side, you would have this sort of like male wisdom, you'd have strength, and you'd have this idea of surrender. And I think you could almost look at the surrender within the context of like surrendering to a higher power, like basically knowing when not to fight, if that makes any sense. I don't know, maybe.
You will find, interesting enough, that in the tradition of alchemy, the European tradition, when the completion of the work is depicted as the marriage of the king and the queen is always on the right and the king is on the left. So it's directly the opposite that what we have in the Sephirotic tree of life. So what I did is I've in the system of Kabbalah that I developed which is a different model of the tree. It's 13 spheres and 36 pathways. The feminine pillar of the tree is actually on the right side, which I've named the pillar of beauty. And then the left side is the pillar of majesty, and that represents the male principle. So in a sense, I'm kind of mirroring, because I think even the alchemists kind of understood that, that this is not a fast and loose kind of rule that we can take for granted, but just realize that whatever the Kabbalists were writing, if you're in any esoteric tradition, at least under the circumstances that a lot of these people were writing, there has to be a lot of dissimulation going on, especially if you have a tradition that is so, the demarcations between the esoteric and the exoteric are so solidly put. And especially Judaism, which is a very nomocentric religion of the law. The esotericism, especially when you're at the level of writing, to some degree at that time, under the circumstances that they were writing, it is very possible that a lot of these people who were writing this stuff and even delineating and graphing the tree, that they were deliberately trying to mislead the uninitiated. So that once, an initiate progressed further and further and further in their own work, it is very possible that these relationships change. But with the Geronese Kabbalists and then their Italian successors in the late Renaissance, they were very explicit. And they placed Bina on the right pillar of the tree. Your sound is gone.
Sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, that was my bad. Oh, also, just to check the comments real quick. So Graham said, "What's up, y'all?" So Graham has some really interesting thoughts. He describes himself as a freelance monotheist, and I'm thinking, after we kind of get through more of our ideas, kind of just bouncing off each other, we could maybe open it up and invite people in and kind of hear their thoughts on this and kind of bounce ideas further. But so there's Graham. Yep. Yeah.
Can we stop there just to unpack this concept?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Monotheism, right?
Mm-hmm.
I follow Henry Corbin's discussion, the French uranologist, who really got into the guts of discussing this. If you take the idea, the word, the very coinage of monotheism, there's a problem that you introduce, and it's a theological problem that you introduce. You're basically making God a super being amongst other beings, rather than making the divinity being itself, right? So if we take monotheism in the sense that all three of the Abrahamic traditions usually delineated in their exoteric sense, then you're left with this contradiction where that the question of being is not only addressed, but it creates a contradiction in the very profession that the Abrahamic monotheisms are trying to make about the one God, in that they're just basically creating a super being amongst other beings. And so this, in a sense, then compromises conceptually the whole ontology of monotheism. Whereas with the scholarship and a lot of writings and speculative work of a lot of people over the last century, we're now beginning to understand that the ancients were not as the whole concept of polytheism itself needs to be thrown out. One of the people I've been reading over the last couple of years, Algis Uzdavinis, this late Lithuanian scholar of religious symbolism, even suggests that we need to even throw the concept of paganism out, because it just doesn't work, because the conceptual universe out of which a lot of these ancient civilizations were cogitating and languaging the reality of the transcendent was far more sophisticated than we give them credit. For example, the ancient Egyptians are one example. The ancient Egyptians didn't really take their gods in a literalist sense. These were just basically aspects of a cosmic aspect of a transcendent one, was beyond any naming. And during the late 18th dynasty, particularly in the New Kingdom period, a lot of this stuff is attributed to Amun. And if you read the text that they've translated, these Egyptologists, have translated about the nature of Amun, Amun starts to take this transcendental aspect where, he is himself, but then he's all the other gods. He's Ra, he's, Isis, he's this. He even takes on the characteristics of all the feminine gods as well. And then when the linguists amongst the Egyptologists have begun to unpack the concept of what the ancient Egyptians understood by the word itself that they used for the deities, Necher. The Necher is also the word that they used for forces of nature. So, as far as the Egyptians are concerned, anyway, and probably the ancient Mesopotamians and the Assyrians, etc., they were taking the nature of these gods, at least in the more, once that you got deeper and deeper into the temple rites, maybe not on the level of the folk and common religion, they were ending up in a very interesting panentheistic kind of cosmos where they were, where the issue of the gods was really a question of the one and the many, rather than just a myriad of beings amongst others. And so, once you begin to look at it and unpack it from that prism, then the question of monotheism and polytheism begins to kind of fade away, because we're talking about something else completely. And this is one of the reasons that in this book that I'm working on right now, the Tree of Hermes, I've coined a phrase, Harmonia Paganorum Abrahamica. So such that in the Sufi universe from which I come from, this is a given, because in that universe, God, the Godhead, whatever you want to call it, manifests itself or self-discloses itself in multiple forms. It is in everything and in nothing. It can appear in an idol and be simultaneously beyond it, because that light, that divine light, permeates all of creation and all of being. So from that perspective, we can take the symbolism of the ancients and whatever and create a dialogue between the monotheisms and the polytheism. And this is what the perennialists have been doing, and especially Algis Davinis in several of his books. One particular book that he wrote about Egyptian theurgy and Neoplatonic theurgy, which is where he really gets into the guts of this stuff. And so my co-worker, who is the artist for these cards of the Noor Tarot, he's really emphasizing the Assyrian element of this. So beginning with the first card, which is the card of Khidr, which replaces the Fool, Khidr being the green man, who makes a cameo appearance in the Quran in this story with Moses. We have formed the Assyrian tree of life around this card, as kind of a bow to the cosmos that this exhibits. And interestingly enough, the Assyrian tree of life is always attributed to the goddess Ishtar, the chief of the chief goddess of this people. And this is contemporaneous when this was going on. The heyday of the Assyrian Empire is also contemporaneous with the Israelite, what we know of the Israelite religion in its form before it went into exile under the Assyrians and then the Babylonians. I think you've muted yourself again.
So yeah, I do that because my dog was coming over here. I was trying to shoo her away, and I didn't want that to be on my. Anyway, so the thing that's really striking to me, and it's like it's one of those things where it's kind of like you could look at this as like, oh, it's faded, but on the other hand, I think it's just one of those things where I'm kind of like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like I was already into the stuff, but so for my Purim costume, I actually went as the Green Man. I fashioned myself this one wreath out of olive branches, and then I even had these like other branches trailing down, looking like long hair, like a Nazir. And then I had these two horns of olive branches with a middle sprig to be like a shin, but also like two horns. And yeah, I mean, it was super uncomfortable. I really should have thought that through a bit better, but yeah, like just this association with the Green Man and this like type of almost like a holy intoxication do you think that also kind of has a similar concept within, like how you talked about this reversal of the pillars, in order to trick people who weren't initiated, might be almost similar to this idea of how all intoxicants were permitted, or at least in later interpretations of Islam, but like the prohibition of khamr?
Yes, the short answer is yes. I think that is part of it. And I've been thinking about this for a lot of years. Especially when I was very heavily involved with the psychedelic community, I thought about this all the time, and I think at least where the Abrahamic traditions are concerned, because of this, really radical demarcation between the esoteric and the exoteric, that for some reason establishment found it threatening, all three of them, in being open and disclosing and making this stuff available to the congregation of the masses. Whereas in other traditions, whether you're talking about India or China, this was not the case. I mean, to this day, we have depictions in Taoist temples of these Taoist monks riding atop mushrooms, which means, pretty explicitly to me anyway, that they were utilizing these plants. But as these traditions get more entrenched, as the quote unquote patriarchy itself gets more powerful, for some reason, they start to take these away from access to the masses, as it were. Whereas in more goddess-centric religions, or even in more esoterically focused or centric religions, and shamanic ones particularly, it's not. So this is a phenomenon, I think, that even anthropology needs to look at more carefully, because it tells us also about the process of entrenchment, of what happens when these establishments suddenly decide that they don't want to give access to just anyone to the numinous. Because, for a very simple reason, is that when you give access to the numinous, right, always, usually, but not always, but certain conclusions are reached by people who are constantly going into that space or interacting with the natural world on that kind of level. And that is always that their understanding of the nature of spirit usually formulates a kind of in a feminine kind of form. Yeah, there are the cards of the North Tower that you're looking through my Twitter page. Yeah. We got 5 more to go. The artist has to work on, and we're basically done with the major arcana of these. But as you can see, in some of these cards, the form of the Assyrian Tree of Life is very present in most of them. Like that one there, that's the moon card that you're looking at. That's the goddess above. And then the dervish sitting there with a cup of wine. And you can't probably see that right now, but the reflection of the goddess falls into his cup of wine. And this is a trope within Sufism that is very present, because we have a trope called the Saqi. The Saqi is the wine bearer, and it's always depicted in the form of a woman. She's the wine bearer that gives the wine of life to the dervish. And she appears throughout all the poetry of people like Hafiz, Rumi, and all the great Sufi masters. She's always present. And that's a theophany of God when it's taken, when it is put into this pill, the Saqi, the wine bearer.
Oh, perfect. Here, I managed to increase the size.
Yeah.
So and turns out I was muted again. So this is interesting. I didn't even notice the connection to the wine, but so it's called kamar. Is there any connection between kamar and khamar?
Yeah, that you can make that because kamar is the moon and khamar is the wine. They're spelled a little differently, but yeah, the connection is there. Yes.
Yeah, it's like you have similar connections, like in they're understood in Hebrew. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. But so another thing that I think is interesting. So here you very clearly see that this tree of life is also very similar to menorah, and this is a lot. This is some of what really started my research, because so I'm guessing that the way that the flowers are these are these
pine cones. They're pine cones.
So, is there a specific reason why they're pine cones?
Yes. There's a huge symbolism of the pine cone. I'm going to be kind of unpacking that throughout the book. But here you have 15 pine cones, and the number is very specific. In Arabic, 15 is the number of both the feminine pronoun hiya, but also the name of Eve. In Hebrew, it's different. In Hebrew, it's Chava is 19, but in Arabic, it's 15. So,
oh wow! Wait, so in Arabic, it's what?
in Arabic, it's 15. Both the pronoun for woman is hiya,
Oh,
as well as Eve is 15, whereas in Hebrew, Chava is 19.
so here, let me just figure this out. So if that would be so because I mean, given I don't think it would still match up. But what's interesting, and this has been kind of one of my theories, is that Chava is actually originally Chaya, but Chaya is actually it's Chaim. And the reason why I'm getting this idea is because you have these traditions of so you have the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. But the thing is, the tree so the tree of knowledge is the tree of basically the tree of Sophia. And then you have the tree of life, which is the tree of Zoe. But the thing is, you have this one understanding that basically, what is it? That the tree of I'm blanking on this. It might be that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is Sophia, is actually it's a possession of the tree of life, and that the tree of life is understood within the monotheistic narrative of being a possession of God. So it's almost like wisdom is hers and she is God's, and the monotheistic narrative.
Or I'd go one better. The way I have depicted this whole narrative in something else I've written, that is another work I'm working on called The Effulgences of Wisdom. The first chapter is devoted to Eve. And I basically make the argument or to conflate all of the symbolism into the same person. So the tree, the serpent, and Eve are the same.
Interesting.
And as the tetrad, or the basic building block of the tetrachys, which is the number 4. So Eve, the serpent, the tree, and God are the same.
Whoa. Oh, wait. So this is interesting. So in that case, you could almost read it as because Eve is contained within this idea of Adam Kadmon, and that so basically it's almost like she is taking out and so there's also the interesting thing, because Adam is put to sleep, but somehow it's also this is something that I was actually talking about with Graham, is that he brought this up, and I mean I kind of pushed back, though I think there still might be something there, this idea that when God is putting Adam to sleep and then he took from his side, it's you could almost read it as it's not clear whether it's God taking from his side or whether it's Adam.
Yeah. I mean, the Gnostic scriptures make it even more explicit, because it's Eve that actually brings Adam to life. Right?
So
and then epiphanizes herself then again as his wife. That's the Gnostic take on this story. But I think that the secret of all this is in the name of Eve herself, Em Kol Chai, the mother of all living. So, somewhere along the line, I think these symbolisms were either being confused deliberately or concealed deliberately to give us the real narrative of what this is all about. But in our doctrine, our narrative of Eve, I follow basically the doctrine of the Bab, Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi put it in his commentary on the second surah of the Quran, where he puts it out in this way, that the sin of Adam is as follows. Adam sins, right? But Eve doesn't. Why? Because the manifestation of the tree, this is the way he puts it, the tree was Eve herself. And because he did not approach the tree properly with the proper etiquette of spiritual ecstasy, he erred. And he even puts it in these terms, that at that moment, the epiphany or the transfiguration of the tree, right, was Fatima. So Fatima, because he was a Shiite esotericist, so Eve transfigures into Fatima, which is kind of a pericope then of the story of Fatima transfigurating into Mary, that happens in one incident in the final years of the Prophet Muhammad's life. But in this narrative, Eve transfigures into Fatima, and because Adam doesn't properly approach the tree, which is his wife, this is where the sin happens. So that he errs because of that. And so he self-expels himself from paradise because of his wrong attitude towards the transfiguration of God that happened through his own wife.
Wow.
I.e. the goddess. Yeah, this is the Bob's commentary. This is where my entire theology of this comes from that particular passage in this commentary on the Surah of the Cow. Yeah.
So
it's very plastic. Yeah.
So one thing that came to my mind when this is from a presentation I made all the way back in, January 19th of, I started this back in 2020, April 20th of 2020. Oh yeah, it was a presentation I put together for was one club I was in. It's kind of fallen apart, but might be trying to get it back together. It's called Ecstasis, but basically about like consciousness, plant medicines, all that stuff. And it was really cool because, it was a student organization at Arizona State University. And so definitely made a lot of good friends there and a lot of connections that I probably wouldn't have if I hadn't had that space. But so one thing that, so part of this presentation, I mean, there's other reasons that I brought it up, but so when God is speaking to Moses and says, Ihya Asher Ihya, or I am who I am, or like, basically like,
I am who I will be. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like, I am that I will be. Yeah. It's like, it's not clear. It's basically this idea of past, present, and future. And you also have like, yeah. Sorry, what?
Yeah. Past, present, and future as a singularity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But the other thing I'm thinking is what happens if you change the first hey to a chet? Ihya Asher Ihya. I will live as I will live. And then that's derived from chaya. And like it almost seems like, the tetragrammaton is connected to the name of Chava or Chaya.
Yes. Well, this has been my personal take for the last 20 years or more, that, what we're dealing with the archetype of Chava, of Eve, is something a lot more than at least the narratives of these three traditions have given us. And in my own entheogenic work and my own meditative work, this stuff has come out again and again and again. That just as the Zohar uses Adam as the prototype of the Mashiach, that perhaps that there is something much deeper even in that it is actually Chava herself who is the prototype of the Mashiach, right? Because even if you take this whole Christology that the Christians introduced about redemption, right? Even assume, which I don't accept, because I think this narrative is actually a double blind, trying to keep certain secrets from the hands of the unworthy. But let us assume if humanity needs to be redeemed from original sin, then the person who committed the sin is the one who's supposed to redeem. So who is Adam here?
So that would be like basically mankind as opposed to just all of mankind.
Yeah. I mean, I think, placing the onus and the responsibility of the so-called original sin on Eve is very problematic. This is why I think that this whole narrative of the book of Genesis needs to be taken a lot deeper, that there are things in there that need to be unpacked beyond the outward narrative of what this is saying. I mean, I've been meditating on the book of Genesis for decades, and it keeps giving and giving and giving and giving. And with my, limited, Hebrew, I've also managed to get in there and do the same kind of workplace that you just did with the Ahya Asher Ahya, and I keep coming back to the same things as you are. That we're dealing with a archetypal narrative that is extremely dense, extremely profound. It is a maze, but it also always keeps coming back to the same point, and that is the centrality of the divine feminine in this, and that all the received opinion that we have had from the textual sources and the textual tradition are actually trying to mislead the uninitiated from the truth of the matter. So one can even take the whole messianic trope and turn it around And the Zohar itself actually gives that to us in many ways. When you go through the Zohar, it is continuously, when it gets into this messianic narrative, it talks about the Messiah as the manifestation of the Shekinah. And both of them, both the Messiah of the house of David and Joseph, are both manifestations of the Shekinah. I mean, then other Kabbalists speculate, well, one is from one is the Shekinah of Kether, and the other one is the Shekinah of Malkut. I mean, I think that's kind of academic. The fact is that the book itself, Zohar itself, insists. So, a friend of mine many years ago made this very humorous observation: is that the Zohar is talking about almost like a hermaphroditic being who is within itself it is female, but it's outwardly representing itself as male. Right? Almost like the Messiah being. I mean, I don't mean this literally, but the Messiah is a sort of transvestite, practically a holy transvestite.
The idea of like the holy androgyne.
Yeah, because it is within itself, it is female. It is the Shekinah, but it only appears as a man in the body of the man. This is a very profound, symbol to just even contemplate on that the Zohar puts out there. But I think we can even take it several steps even beyond what even the Zohar itself is saying, and speculate that from a certain point of view, why does it have to be that the Messiah is a man? Why cannot the Messiah be a woman?
Yeah, that's honestly kind of, I mean, especially because it was just Purim, this is something I've been thinking about. Given, I mean, there's some people who might look at me like, oh, how dare you? But I mean, the story of Purim is probably just, like these archetypal stories being cobbled together. And the fact that, you have someone named Mordechai, connected to Marduk and Ishtar. I mean, there's interesting meanings because you have the possibility that, to Esther, so Esther could either be connected to Ishtar, which is basically how it's described as being, it's a Assyrio-Babylonian name that is, basically she takes on, because her actual name Hadassah. And there's another interesting thing. So Hadassah means myrtle. And every god in the ancient world had a tree associated with them. And myrtle was the tree of like Venus, or of the goddess of love. And it also corresponds with this idea of Esther, how she uses, her looks and her beauty, and, her charms in order to, win over the king and save her people from being slaughtered. And not only that, but she's in preparation. She's anointed in persimmon oil and all this, very aromatic oils, not the oil of anointing, but still she's anointed with oil, a different type of oil. And she, after this preparation, she, enters the chamber of the king and basically manages to change his mind. And there's this idea that that in this context of Purim, that the king is also this reference to the king, God, but not saying that the king is God, but that it's kind of this metaphysical reference to it. But in that, there's this idea that God is not a man that he will change his mind. But you also see this same motif in the Canaanite tradition, or in Ugaritic tradition, with the Epic of Baal, where Baal and his sister wife Anat are trying to, get a permission to establish a temple or a house for themselves on Mount Saphon. And so they go to El, and El says no to Baal. So then Anat goes, well, if you don't give in, I'm going to make your lamb white beard drip red with blood, and I'll smash your head open. And it's interesting because this idea of Anat threatening to smash open the head of El, basically this idea of the daughter breaking open the head of the father. You see this connection to the story of Zeus and Athena, and how Athena bursts forth from his head. And it even says in Proverbs that wisdom wisdom poured out Mirosh Mikedem Aretz, from the head, from the source of the world, or from the originator of the world, potentially the head of the originator of the world or something. But I forget where I was going with that, but
and puts Bina as the second Sephira. If wisdom comes out of the head of the creator of the world, or the source, the origin, the originator. That's Keter. So the second Sephira must be Bina.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it also just it makes a lot more sense within this. I mean, like for instance, you have well, it's not a perfect comparison, but it's almost like you have this idea that wait, is it? I'm trying to make sure. I need to double check before I make myself look stupid. How chokhmah is spelled, because it contains two letters that can make the same sound. Dang it! No, so it's spelled with a chet first, but basically it's almost like you have this idea of you have these two letters that so you have keter, which could also be a kaf could also be a chaf. So potentially in another world it could have been cheter. But the point is that because you have these two sounds that are similar, you could almost say as like you have the two males, or I mean, given within this context, I think that Keter would be more like the mother-father, but because it's still not even understood as the Ein Sof. The Ein Sof is maybe more comparable to. Wait, shoot, where was I going with? Oh yeah, the idea of the Ein Sof is maybe more comparable to this idea of like the monad, or like the unpotentiated, because you have this idea of potentiation without division, or kind of like, but. So this is from the Apocryphon of John. So the Father's thought became a reality. So the nous. Oh wait, here. No, I forgot this. So now this Father is the one who beholds himself in the light surrounding him, which is the spring of living water. And this motif, the spring of living water, you also see it in the story of Pardes, that when you reach when you reach the pillars, don't say mayim, don't say water, because it's like this idea that it's an illusion or something, almost that you'll get stuck in it, like kind of with this idea, because it says, and provides all the realms. He reflects on his image everywhere, sees it in the spring of the Spirit, and becomes enamored of his luminous water. For his image is in the spring of pure luminous water surrounding him. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of thoughts on that. That was one or two. See, in a form of the cosmology that I followed, I mean, using even the word father, mother, from this level is figurative, ultimately. But when we talk about the first eminent, the first thing that comes out of the Ein Sof, out of the Godhead, for lack of a better word, right? The term that in the tradition I follow we use is the primal will. And the primal will, Mashiatul Ula, grammatically in Arabic itself is already in feminine, right? And this is referred to as a she. The word nukhta, the point, which is nikud in Hebrew, that itself in Arabic is a feminine word. And so whenever this is discussed in the text, it's always, you're using feminine grammatical case to explain it. And this is the Sophia. This is the logos, the Sophia as a singularity. It is the mother who is the father, as it were. Or, to use a great analogy that comes up in Shiite hadith in relation to Fatima. In relation to Fatima, they Fatima is called the mother of her father. Abiha. She's the mother of Muhammad. Even though she's her daughter, Fatima is the daughter of the Prophet of Islam, but her epithet is Abiha, the mother of her father. So this is the relation. This is the symbolism of this, of what this represents.
So that's absolutely fascinating, because you have this parallel in Jewish tradition. I'm trying to think, was it called her mother? Let's see. Where is it? Okay, here it is. Shemot Rabbah. So this is from the Talmud. So, oh wait, shoot, I need to get English here. Oh wait, does this not have? Dang it! 1 second. where is it? Okay, here. Shira Shirim Rabba, maybe. Here it is. So, oh wait, what? Okay, this is interesting. So, even regarding the plagues of Pharaoh, the Holy One. Also, there's another thing that I've been looking into, because this idea of the Holy One referring to Yahweh, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because, like, for instance, there's this idea that basically, if people read it, as the two are one, or I mean, and I do think you have this idea that they are one in this type of unity, but not like that not to say that like one is not her because it's him, if that makes any sense. But
Yeah.
basically, you have this idea. Dang it, I keep having to bring up new tabs. Once it's in Habakkuk, and this just really, really blew my mind open when I learned this. So, what is this? So Eloah. So here, it almost seems like in this context, it's not even referring to Yahweh, which is interesting.
Eloah is feminine, is it not?
Um.
Eloah is in the feminine case.
Oh, I'm not. No, I'm not sure, because Eloah is the proper form of El. But actually, now that you're right, I'm not 100% sure.
I'm pretty sure it's in the feminine case, especially since it ends in a het.
Oh, here it says masculine. Because this is Elo. I think this is Eloah, and wait. So this also wait. So this would be Eloha. Yeah, that I think you actually might be right, because I'm pretty sure that the feminine or that the male form would be Eloah and the feminine would be Eloha, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But anyway, so here it says Eloah mitevanya vov. So Eloah, or God, is coming from Teman, and so that's one location. The Kadosh and the Holy One, Mahar Paran. So it almost seems to be implying this sort of duality, that they're two different things because they're coming from two different locations. But but yeah, and then was it? I'm trying to think. Yeah, then wait, does he say? Okay, yeah, and then here it talks about His Majesty covers the skies, His splendor fills the earth. It is Vinoga, and it is radiant, Keor, like light, Tihye, that is Karnaim, that is horns, Meyado, from all, like from its sides, Velosham Chavion Veuzo, and within it there is his strength, or his, I guess it's saying glory. But yeah, it's just interesting because it almost seems to be implying this duality. But yeah, anyway, the Holy One, blessed be He, brought about, and again, maybe it's the Holy One, blessed be she, brought about peace, as it is stated, there was hail and fire aflame within the hail. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nehemiah, and the rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda said, bowls of hail filled with fire, the one did not extinguish that one, and that one did not extinguish this one. Rabbi Hanin said, that description is similar to a pomegranate Ariel, as the seed inside which each Ariel, and that's derived from the same root as orla, which is the foreskin, can be seen. Rabbi Nehemiah said, fire and hail intermingled with each other. Rabbi Hanin said that description is similar to a bowl of an oil lamp, where water and oil are intermingled and it continues to burn. This one, the rabbis say, death, mita, and reassembly, mitkalcha, death and reassembly in order to perform the will of their creator. This is analogous to a king who had two powerful legions, and they were enemies with each other. Once they saw that the king's war was intensifying, they made peace with one another in order to wage the king's war. So too, fire and hail are enemies with each other. When they saw the war of the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, which was the war against the Egyptians, they made peace between them, and waged the war of the Holy One, blessed be He, against Egypt. That is what is written. There was hail and fire aflame within the hail, a miracle within a miracle. And so this is the part where it's like kind of piecing, going off of this. At the crown with which his mother crowned him, he said to him, have you possibly heard from your father what is at the crown with which his mother crowned him? He said to him, yes. He said to him, what? He said to him, it is analogous to a king who had an only daughter, and he loved her exceedingly much and would call her my daughter. He did not stop loving her until he called her my sister. He did not stop loving her until he called her my mother. So too the Holy One, blessed be he, loved Israel exceedingly much and called them my daughter, that it is written, hear my daughter and see. He did not stop loving them until he called them my sister, as it is stated, open for me, my sister, my bride, or my sister, my lover. He did not stop loving them until he called them my mother, as is stated, heed me, my people, listen to me, my nation, ule umi. My mother, ule imi, is written. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai stood, kissed him on his head, and said, had I come only to hear from you this explanation, it would have sufficed for me. Rabbi Chanina Bar Yitzchak said, we have reviewed the whole Bible in its entirety, and we have not found that Bathsheba crafted a crown for Solomon, her son, and you say, at the crown with which his mother crowned him. Rather, just as a crown is set with jewels and pearls, so the tent of meeting was conspicuous with sky blue, purple, and scarlet wool, and linen. And I've made the contention, I've actually talked with Chris Bennett about this, and he was skeptical about this at first, but he found arguments from John Quito that support this. But basically, that this word for linen or fine linen, which is sheish, is probably actually derived from the asha, like it's connected to ashisha, which is referred to as these pressed cakes, which are probably connected to this idea of hashish, or pressed keef. But then on top of that, you have the fact that sheish is basically the Egyptian word for cannabis, or at least one of them, was shemshemet. And sheish and shemshemet, like I think there's a good argument to make that the if you have this superiority, or like not superiority, but like this rule of Egypt over the Canaanites, then they're probably going to be using, especially at this time, because they didn't have much contact with burned cannabis yet, probably they were just using it for the fibers, and so they would have used this term shemshemet likely, which is what they Egypt referred to for their ropes. And what's interesting about this is that shemshemet was associated with both Ra and the goddess Seishat, and Seishat is very similar in typology to Asherah. But basically, if they wanted to avoid that association with an Egyptian god, they would have had to drop most likely the mems in order to drop the association with Ra. So you get Sheshet, but then that's still too close to Seishat. So then they drop the Taf and it becomes Shesh. But again, that I don't know if that's true. That's just a theory that I have.
Interesting. Very interesting.
But yeah, what do you think about this idea, how it's referring to, and again, the reason why it's referring to Israel as the daughter is because there's this idea that the Shekhinah lives or dwells amongst or within Israel. And so because of that, he's referring to that. So in that context, it's not saying Israel, who was, within the context of the Bible, a man, or the patriarch of the nation of Israel. It's referring to the Shekhinah dwelling within them.
So long as we understand any concept of Israel as the true initiates, I have no problem with it.
Yeah.
But if you over temporalize as a lot of the interpretations of what the Shekinah have become in the mainstream, and you end up with a lot of problems.
Yeah.
You got to take this up to a more higher metaphysical level about what this represents, and what, in the way that Henry Corbin used to put it, what theophany of a person does it refer to? Is the question that needs to be asked.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is also one of the things where it's kind of for instance, is this if you view this as a universal concept, then you have to apply it universally. But if this is just a tribal concept, then you could say, well, it's you don't need the Shekhinah to dwell within other peoples because they have their own ideas of basically their own Shekhinahs. And it's not to say that there is no connection between them, but it's they have their own cultural expressions of it. So while, anyone could theoretically, for instance, given I still think that, Judaism is missing out on a lot of this just because mostly out of necessity. If you were to embrace this stuff in medieval Europe, you'd be put to death as a witch.
Yeah, of course.
But basically, I think that
or as either a Cathar or Albigensian, and they kill you all the same. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I mean,
so
groups of the church. The three groups are more than that, but eventually the Templars as well. He went after the Cathars, the Albigensians, and the Jews, and then the Templars, the church.
Yeah, and it's honestly so bizarre because to people this stuff seems so anti Christian, when in reality there's a good argument to be made that it was probably the original Christianity.
That's the only conclusion that one can reach. I mean, when you peel off the layers and layers and layers of what happened, and as I mentioned before we went on, the scholarship of people like Robert Eisenman has done such an amazing service to biblical scholarship as a whole. He unpacks some of this. He doesn't quite get into the divine feminine, but what early Christianity would have been, he kind of reassembles, and one could then speculate based on what they were, of what kind of doctrines that they would have originally espoused.
Yeah.
And they were far more interesting, actually, than what they eventually became as mainstream Christianity that we know today.
So there's another really interesting thing. So you know about the whole idea that like Abraham and Sarah, that they weren't able to have children before God blessed them. So their original names were Avram and Sarai. So
Right.
there's this tradition that God, and again, God, which is very ambiguous within this context, which actually technically it's El Shaddai, which technically means like the breasted God, or God of the breasts. And it's probably a reference to the goddess, and then later has to be reinterpreted as El Shaddad, or the God who destroys, or the Almighty God, which it's so bizarre to me. Literally Shaddai, not Shaddad, but then they have to say, oh, well, it's a double dalet, and then it gets dropped, so it's referring to it just doesn't make sense to me. But basically, so El Shaddai takes the Yud, and notice this, takes the Yud from Sarah, not from Abraham, or not from Sarai, and not from Avram, and splits the Yud into two hays, puts one hay in Avraham and the other in Sarah. And the thing that's really interesting about this is, so Sarai means my prince. Sarai. No, it would be my princess. But then Sarah could actually mean her, either just princess or her princess. But the other thing is that Sarah plus an aleph is Asara, and if you just change the sa to a sha, Ashara.
Very, very interesting. And also the splitting of the Yud itself into two hairs this is espousing the doctrine of the two Shekinahs within the tree.
Yeah, the two handmaidens of the Shekinah, right? Wow, it's so interesting. So Rabbi Yehoshua of Sichnin said, also Sichnin, that might be from the same root as Shachan. I'm not. It might just be Sachan. I'm not 100%. These also have this one. I forget his name, but someone from Kfar Sachania. But anyway, said in the name of Rabbi Levi, you find that when the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Moses, "Craft for me a tabernacle, a suli mikdash," he could have positioned 4 poles and stretched a curtain over them, and it would have been a tabernacle. However, the Holy One, blessed be He, did not do. Blessed be He, did not do so, but rather He took him up on high, and He showed him red, green, black, and white fire. What? I've never heard. So the green and the red, that's interesting. I knew about the black and the white, but not the green and the red. And said to them, "Craft like this for me." Moses said before him, "Master of the universe, from where do I have black, red, green, and white fire?" He said to Moses, "In their configuration that you are being shown on the mountain." Rabbi Avun said, "This is analogous to a king who had a fine image. He said to a member of his household, 'Craft me one like it.' He said, 'My lord, the king, am I able to craft one like it?' He said to him, 'You with your materials, and I with my glory.' So too the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Moses, 'See and craft.' He said to him before him, 'Master of the universe, am I a god that I can craft something like that?' He said to him, 'In their configuration.'" This is analogous to a king who appeared to a member of his household in a fine bejeweled garment. He said to him, "Craft me one like this." He said, "My lord the king, am I able to craft one like this?" So too the Holy One, blessed. He said to him, "Master of the universe." Okay, this is really repetitive. Oh, wait, here it is. "Just as you see on high, craft below." So this idea of above and below. It does not say here stand up acacia wood, but rather acacia wood standing, as though they are placed among the hosts on high. If you craft something below that is like that which is on high, I will abandon my heavenly counsel and descend and restrict my divine presence, my Shekhinah, in your midst below. And what's interesting, holy crap. So this word restrict, it actually might be referring to shara, because one of the meanings of shara is basically to bind or to appoint. And within this context, it actually means that I will restrict my divine presence. And so I will restrict would be ashara. Like, I'm not joking. Like, it's one of those things where you could read it as it's saying restrict my divine, or like appoint my divine presence in your midst below. And then it's still referring to her. But if you just read it as ashra shekhinati betocham, then it's definitely referring to her. I don't know. It's like one of those things where I read this and I'm like, it's clear to me that Judaism was preserving something much older, and that the idea of the, like, for instance, there's this idea of the fence around the Torah so that you don't stray. But again, I think maybe we're reading it the wrong way, that people think they're fenced, that the fence is fencing them in, when in reality it's fencing them out. But anyway, back to the thing that I did want to talk about before with the shape. So, here it is. So, this is a depiction of the Assyrian tree of life. And here you have these, pine cone shapes as well. But I've actually made the argument that these aren't pine cones, but they're cannabis buds. And the reason for that is because the Hebrew is obscure enough that it could be that. Basically, so it says, and it was mimchorat, or like this machar, like from the next day, vayavo Moshe, when Moshe went in, el ohel, to the tent, ha edot, the tent of the meeting, vehine perach, and he beheld perach mateh, a flowering staff, Aharon, of Aaron, lebeit Levi, for the house of Levi, vayitze perach, and it was shooting out flowers, vayitzetz seats, and sending out blossoms, I think. Yeah, sending out blossoms, vayigmol shkedim, and producing shkedim. And so people interpret this as almonds because of the shape of the tree of life. And you can see this definitely is almond shaped, but there's actually another word that is derived from that same root, and it is connected to the word almond, but it doesn't actually mean an almond itself. It's let me see if I can pull it up. But any thoughts in the meantime?
In one sense, it really doesn't matter whether you're talking about cannabis and pine cones, because these symbologies are always amphibolious. They're transparent to other things simultaneously, so it can both mean that and another thing simultaneously. There's no law of excluded middles here that applies to this kind of symbolism. Yeah, it's just the layers at which you're addressing it.
Definitely, I see what you mean. So here it is. So you have shaked, which means almond tree, so called from its early waking out of winter's sleep, according to, I don't know what that stands for, but then shigda is interesting. So the kof gets replaced with a gimel in Aramaic, but sebdo or sebto, whence Ethiopic sagd. So yeah, that means almond. But then you have shakad, which means cups shaped like almond blossoms. So, well, and they're implying here that it's saying like almond blossoms, but what if the cups themselves are shaped like almonds?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, like, I don't know how solid that argument is, but the reason why I bring that up is because the shape of the, let's see, here. Let's see. Here. Oh, shoot. How do I zoom out? Oh, here. So the left is a menorah that, So this was found in Jerusalem. and you can see, the 3 branches and the center stalk. And then on the right, which looks, very much like a menorah, you have the 3 branches on each side, and then you have the middle stalk. But what's interesting here is that, like, you see the leaves, but not the buds. And this was actually something that I noticed when I first grew cannabis from seed. And I realized that the pattern is exactly that of a menorah. Like, it kind of freaked me out.
The menorah is the Asherah, is what is left of the Asherah is the menorah.
Yeah.
With their fruit, whether you take it as the cannabis or the pomegranate or all of them together. So the menorah is what remains of goddess worship, Judaic goddess worship itself.
And the thing I find, yeah.
This occurred to me many years ago. Many, many years ago.
So something that really, I think it's interesting because let me try to find a good picture. Something that's like very clear. If you literally have to read between the lines to, okay, I'm trying to find a good picture, but all these are just, okay, here. Let's see, it needs to be 4, and I don't want it. Shoot, is there a way to just, anyway, the point that I'm trying to make, here, this works. Here, I'll just make it full screen. Share this tab instead. Here, that works. So if you look here, you see, and there's this idea that you're not supposed to make a menorah because, like, it's too holy. But something that I literally noticed this a few days ago. So you have, 4 here, but look in between them. 1, 2, 3. And then this is the middle. So you have, the middle, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the negative space in between. It's this idea of white fire on black fire.
Very interesting.
Let's see. So I'm trying to think. What was it? Sorry, I'm just trying to think what it was that we're. Oh, right. So sorry, one moment. Okay. Let me see if I can find what I was talking about. So let's see, what is it? Ashura and the Sheikh. Wait, what's this? Ashura and the menorah. Oh. Let's see. So it's also interesting when you hear like when you hear people who are like, very traditional Jews talking about the Shekhinah, or like things are associated with the divine feminine, because it's like oh, right. This is okay. I remember what I was going to say. So have you ever heard of resurrection plants?
Vaguely, yeah, sure.
So my argument is that, in a way, Judaism is a resurrection plant. But the thing is that, like, there's a lot of people who kind of end up missing the point, because it's not as simple as it being one or the other. It's like, basically, you look at it. You look at this. Is that here? Let me see. So, like, you see how it blooms from basically being dropped.
There's still life within these leaves. Years of drought may plague them, but nothing can stop these plants from rising again. These comeback kids may even teach us how to make the plants we eat more resistant to drought. These are the resurrection plants.
And the thing is, like, you literally have this idea applied to Asherah and actually, yeah, I just need to give my throat a little break, take a quick dab, and while I watch this video, and then I can share my thought about where I'm getting this from. But in the meantime, I do just want to go over some of the comments. So we have, let's see, one active area of investigation for me is the connection between the pine cones and the omphalos, which was an egg in netting similar to those pine cones. Isn't that also connected with like the Oracle of Delphi?
Yes, it is.
Interesting. Let's see.
And the
Yeah.
whatever that was.
Yeah. Though it is interesting because if it was a cannabis bud and they were putting it basically on this pyre or whatever, it could produce the smoke because they're still not sure. And I think the theory that it was like ethylene or something has been disproven because the rates from the fissure are like not high enough to cause anything. But again, it's possible that it's just changed since ancient times. But so Graham says, as an egalitarian, I see both male and female interpretations as intended. Neither is more fundamental than the other. I think you're right, but at the same time, there's like there is this element of, and this is one of the things where not all men are part of the patriarchy, but it's kind of like, and there is this idea within Judaism, different contexts, but basically that we're not required to finish the work, but we're not allowed to what's the word, like to cease from it either. And so it's this idea that like, yeah, there is also this idea of like divine masculinity, like Wahid was talking about with his pillar of majesty. It's not just where like you have one good and one bad. It's simply that it's reframing it within this understanding of the feminine coming first, simply because everyone has a mother. And I mean, given everyone has a father too, but this idea that everyone is born through a womb, given that might not be the case in a few years, but
No, but the genesis of the symbol begins from that frame. So it's I think we got to get away from this whole superiority inferiority kind of talk when we're talking about these symbolism, because first of all, we're talking on a qualitatively different level of being. And it's qualitative, it's not quantitative. So this question of superiority, inferiority does not occur in that context, right? It's about what is the formula, or what is the shape of the seed, as you would, at the beginning. This is the question, and this is why at least the Genesis story, in that particular passage where it throws the name of Eve as being the acrostic, the mother of all living, is such a centrally important motif. At least to look then through the rest of the Bible when unpacking this stuff, unpacking its symbolism, and trying to get into the esoteric stream of the meanings.
Definitely, yeah. So Graham also says, also the myth of Isis taking the name of Ra. And this is something you see in a lot of traditions, how the name of a god is actually also their spouse, which is really interesting because there's this idea in, let me see. Oh yeah, here, I've got to show you this because this is like literally Rashi. He's, oh wait, no, I have to type more than Rashi.
But I mean, going back to Isis, I mean, the name of Isis and Osiris in the original Egyptian is Asa, Osiris, and Aset.
Oh, wow.
So that Aset is basically the feminine form of the name Asa, who's Osiris.
Or kind of like El and Elah, or Elat, or Allah and Alat.
Precisely.
So the only thing though, was it, oh yeah, wasn't one of the forms of Osiris, or like one of the pronunciations, Wasir?
One of the epithets of Osiris.
Oh, okay. So it's not the name, it's just an epithet?
Yeah.
Interesting. So this is something that Rashi, who is, for context, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, lived in Troyes, France, 1040 to 1105. So this is before before Kabbalah, within the form of like Lurianic Kabbalah, or even really Zoharistic Kabbalah, I think, because that started around the 12th century, I think, right?
Yeah.
So Rashi's commentary is an essential explanation of the Tanakh and resides in a place of honor on the pages of almost all editions of the Tanakh. Over 300 super commentaries have been written to further explain Rashi's comments on the Torah, while quoting many. Anyway, so the thing that I want to point out, because this just blew my mind when I saw it. So V'chol makom asher ezkir. So in all the places that I like cause my name to be remembered, ezkir et shmi, or here it says in all places where I mention my name. Anyway, so asher eten lecha, that I give to you reshut lehazkir, permission. Permission lehazkir, to mention Shem hameforash sheli, my my unknowable or unutterable name, the Shem hameforash. Sham avo, there I will come, alaych, upon you, ubarachtich, and I will bless you. And here it says, Ashrei Shechinati Alecha. So this is Rashi's commentary now. He's saying that means I will appoint my Shekhinah to be upon you. But what's interesting here is if you read this without the vowels, it could just be Asherah Shechinati.
Interesting.
And it even makes sense because it says in all places where I mention my name, which you could read as Asherah because she is Yahweh and he is Asherah. It's like this, it's this basically reversing of the poles, but like Asherah is she and he is Yahweh, but she's also Yahweh and he's Asherah. And I think these ideas come from a much older place where it was probably referring to El rather than Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
But
Very interesting.
yeah, let's see. And then it says, from this you may learn that he did not give any permission to pronounce his proper name except in the place where the Shekhinah would come. And this is the chosen house, another name for the temple at Jerusalem. He gave permission to the priests to pronounce his holy name. So notice this is saying Yahweh gave permission to his priests to pronounce his holy name there whilst lifting up their hands to bless the people. So this is a reformatting saying that the only people who can mention them is the priests, whereas previously it would have just been everyone. But anyway, so my argument about Judaism is that it probably is this preservative form that where you have all these older traditions getting kind of just melded into one in order to preserve them because, just for context, the idea of idols in the first place for a people that are forced to constantly move is already going to be a bad idea because it's more stuff to lug with you everywhere. But you can actually see that it's being used. Yeah.
Very right. Very true.
And I mean, you even see the narrative of Jacob and Rachel that she literally steals her father's household idols from him and takes them with them back to Canaan. So, yeah, here.
So the anti-idolatry has a more practical genesis. This is a very interesting argument.
Yeah, especially because there's this idea that it's not like basically there are commentaries from Jewish rabbis where they're not saying that like, oh, this is some horrible evil. It's more so the pagans are foolish for worshiping these idols because don't they see that they're worshiping just mere material? And, this idea that they're worshiping a creation and that they themselves are a creation rather than worshiping the creator. But the idea is that you're using those things as a focus in which to be, because like you were saying before, God is everywhere, but everywhere also implies within idols because they exist in everything. And as part of that, it's not saying that the idols are any more holy than the tree down the road or the house that provides you shelter. It's literally just saying that it's a way that you're able to manifest, perceptions of divinity before yourself, almost like a locus.
Give you one notable example. This always floors a lot of Muslims when either I mention it or other people mention it. If you look at every classical form of the Islamic prayer niche, the mihrab, right? The oval shape. This is the shape of a woman. So the bowing to the prayer niche is actually bowing to the eternal goddess. Because the oval is the form of the woman. It's the geometric form of the feminine.
Interesting. It also reminds me, oh my God, if any of my Catholic friends are watching this, I don't. The thing is, I don't even, we live in a society that is so, what's the word, like hypersensitized to sex in a way where it's like hyper offensive, but it's like why are we viewing the things that literally bring life into being as, you know, disgusting? It's something that's been indoctrinated into our society.
It's interesting you mentioned that. The Zoroastrians have a interesting explanation for that, or the more mystical tradition within Zoroastrianism. The more you define things, or the more they say, the more that you try to name things, right? The more you lock yourself into the mixture between the celestial and the infernal, right? Whereas the goal of humanity is to liberate itself fully to the celestial and escape the inferno, from the Zoroastrian point of view. So the Abrahamic traditions, the three of them, have consistently tried to define the sacred. They've overdefined, overthought it, so much so that they have fenced themselves in and boxed themselves in from it, you know, to the point that they're becoming life deniers, just like what you that example that you put before. Whereas the secret is not to do that, right? So if you banish the goddess from a tradition, she has ingenious ways of coming back. In
Something
Islam,
like this.
the prayer niche, the menorah in Judaism, which is, you know, a representation of the Asherah, and so, and you know, in Christianity, she came back in the form of the Theotokos, you know, the Mary, the Virgin.
Yeah.
With the Orthodox Christians, I mean, that whole theology around Mary becomes profound. You know, it's just she's almost practically the fourth hypostasis of their Trinitarianism.
Yeah, and it kind of raises a question. Well, if that's the case, why does it have to be three?
Exactly. Precisely. Why not four? Which is tetrakias. It's the basic building block of the geometric form of the triangle. One of the most sacred numbers of the Pythagoreans.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because you already have Christians, like especially within Christian Kabbalah, who are willing to put a shin in the tetragrammaton to make it, you know, I mean, given it doesn't even make it Yehoshua because you would need an ayin. But
yeah,
the point is they're already comfortable with this idea of adding something in. So what's the problem with adding in something to this idea of and it all has to do with the Trinity being just established as doctrine at Nicaea.
Yeah. And also because they're one of the fallacies of Trinitarian doctrine is that it has horizontalized the hypostases, whereas in Neoplatonism, you know, it's a vertical relationship. You know, the one, the nous, and then the suke. It's very straightforward, but it's a vertical. You know, it's a vertical emanationist kind of scheme. But in Christian Trinitarianism, they just flip it and make it horizontal, and that's where all the confusion arises. So the nature of the Godhead is confused by this doctrine in many ways, which is what both Jews and Muslims have consistently complained about.
Interesting. So Jody says Yud Yud Yahweh Adonai equals father mother equals yin yang cow and goat. Interesting. I mean, you do notice this like this association with the cow with the mother and then the goat with the father. I don't know if that's what they're going for, but speaking of the
if you here's where it gets very interesting. If you associate whenever you associate the cow with the mother, that means that the aleph is a male letter, is a feminine letter actually, right? Which in Judaism, it's extinct. So what this does to the Kabbalah, right, and the paths within the tree is quite interesting, because the first path is the path of aleph. So if this becomes the path of the mother within the Sephirotic tree of life, then it's not a stretch at all. You see what this means? Just through the letter symbolism alone.
So it's almost like you have Aleph, which is going from the source to create the mother, and then you have Bet, which is going from the mother to create the like the logos.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The triple that triple goddess thing going on within the tree.
So so like that would be like Malchut. How do you count that? Like Malchut, Bina, and Yesod?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Interesting. But yeah, so something I did want to bring up because we were talking about this. So this is from the Vagina Museum on Twitter. This image of Madonna din Naviganti by Maria Scanu at Santa Teresa de Gallura has gone viral recently because some eagle-eyed viewers have noticed it looks more than a little like a vulva. But is it deliberate? Let's see. We guess we'll stand this way. We'll get this out of the way by saying, in general, hooded and robed figures standing with their arms outstretched will form a shape not dissimilar to a vulva. That said, this isn't the first time the Virgin Mary has been depicted with imagery resembling a vulva. Depictions of Our Lady of Guadalupe have depicted Mary surrounded by rays of light in a vulva-shaped pattern since the 16th century. Interesting. Yeah, this is... What?
There you go. There it is.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like basically referring to her as the womb of creation. But the thing is that this is like the idea of the heavenly Queen of Heaven as opposed to the earthly Queen of Heaven.
Exactly. Which is what the word Theotokos in Greek means, God creator.
Interesting.
Or God bearer.
Isn't that also that's a Greek concept, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
which is enshrined, it's enshrined doctrine in Eastern Orthodox Christianity.
Interesting. So an elongated oval shape with the figure's head towards the top has been used at least since the Middle Ages in depicting Mary. It's so common there's a name for it, mandorla. Mary isn't the only figure depicted in mandorlas. Jesus frequently appeared within the motif in the Middle Ages. Look, honestly, we could talk about medieval vulvas all day, but we'll conclude with the throwback thread, everything you need to know about Jesus's vagina. And so it's referring to his wound being depicted as a vulva. And
God
I think
the God born from the vulva of the Godhead is another way to phrase that.
Interesting. Oh wow, this person's sculpture. My recent sculpture is a contribution to the sacred wound genre, and like it's interesting because there's this concept that the wound is what gives the blood that gives people the life. Like it's very, I mean,
but if you have you ever gone to some of these either the Gothic or Renaissance cathedrals in Europe where the wound is depicted? I saw one in the Vatican a couple of years ago, and the wound itself, the way it's depicted, looks like a vagina, looks like a vulva.
I'm trying to think if there's any similarities with it. Well, so I can't think of any parallels within Jewish tradition that are like this idea of. I mean, there probably is something, I'm just not able to think of it right now. But what's interesting is you even have some depictions where let's see, sacred wound of Christ lapping blood. Let's see, where is it? No. Yeah. Is it here? No. Well, so this is one where they're drinking blood from the stigmata. But I think there's also, there's ones where you have, I forget off the top of my head. Wait, is this interesting? This shows the angels as actually collecting the blood. This is like really, I mean, this is stuff that is a bit more out of my field than the others because I haven't done enough research on, divine feminine within Christianity beyond the connections to the Holy Spirit and Mary. But yeah. So, do you have any other? Oh wait, I accidentally stopped sharing. Dang it. But yeah. So back to the idea of resurrection plants, though. There's this idea that if they're starved of water, they're able to survive. And like, it's in such a way that I really think there is an argument that Judaism is essentially what happened. And this thing that you'll notice, whenever you have points of like lack of oppression, you have this embrace of the divine feminine. And it's almost like because there's this ability to, be free in more of that sense, but that freedom also causes a lot of people to just abandon the tradition altogether rather than try and reclaim it. But I'm trying to think, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, I mean, like, for instance, and this is the thing that's really clear to me. You have all these prophets that are saying, turn from your ways, stop worshiping other gods, otherwise you'll be destroyed. And then they stop worshiping the other gods, and then they're destroyed. So it's like, it doesn't make sense. The narrative literally doesn't make sense. Because you think if they stopped worshiping other gods and they stopped worshiping the mother, as the narrative is supposedly saying, that would save them. But it doesn't.
But here's the thing: there are no other gods. All the gods are the same one. And that's the perspective that I think a more sophisticated approach to these questions, the question of the one and the many and the many in the one can approach. And through goddess worship, at least when it starts to get very deeply mystical, that's where you always end up in one form or another. And it's always patriarchy, at least from the historical examples and analysis and evidence that we have, that seems to want to taxonomize everything. Whereas the ancients, in their heydays, I mean, these civilizations have ups and downs and they decline and all of that stuff. But in their heydays, there's understanding these temple cultus was extremely deep, and that's one of the reasons that allowed these syncretizations to then happen in late antiquity, where people weren't even thinking that there's a contradiction between joining two gods together, because they're not thinking from a material point of view. They're looking at this from a much more elevated theosophical point of view, to put it in different ways. Or the way I would explain this to a Muslim is, like, for example, in Islam, in mystical Islam, the focus is on the names, right? So, you have 99 names that are mentioned in the Quran, but then in the various prayers and whatnot, more names crop up. One prayer that is attributed to the Prophet Muhammad has 1,001 names in it. But when you can join and combine names together and they all become a new name, does that mean that there's a new God? No, it's the same God. It's just that once these names are combined, new names are formed. It's a different way of contemplating the one. And this is the perspective that I believe, and some scholars have come to the same conclusion, that ancient polytheism, just like with Hinduism today, had this, panentheistic or henotheistic concept of its deities. So, that means that whatever narrative that the Abrahamic traditions, at least for the masses or exoterically, were pushing, on an esoteric level, these traditions always end up in the same place. They start to realize, well, actually, Hashem is in everything, is everyone. It can even abide and speak in idols. And when you then have recourse to texts such as the Iamblichus, the dialogue he has with Porphyry in the Mysteries, statues and rites of statues, start to take on a much more interesting dimension than what the monotheistic, the mainstream exoteric monotheistic narratives give it credit. So, in my opinion, it's these sorts of narratives, and especially from traditions like Neoplatonism, which have exercised such a deep influence on all three of the Abrahamic traditions. It's this that we have to reclaim, but by the same token, simultaneously, we also have to reclaim the divine feminine in all three of these traditions. I mentioned to you last night that my reading of Abraham Heschel, who's one of my intellectual heroes, he started to propose this in various ways, that perhaps one of the things that will eventually save Judaism itself from atrophying as a tradition is to reopen the doors of the prophetic tradition.
Yep. I mean, it's so clear, because at the end of the day, that's probably that rejection of the prophetic tradition is the same rejection of various plant medicines, where it's like, even though you literally have references to it and this is the thing, it's so interesting, because the reasons that are given as explanations for why you're not supposed to do this is dina malchut dina, that the law of the kingdom is the law. And so basically that religious Jews have basically been in a way, they've basically been convinced into getting rid of the things that they used to do to, I mean, because there's all these, references to various rabbis and, Kabbalists smoking pipes of hemp or things that we don't even know. And that's not even to speak about the things that they were drinking. And at the end of the day, it's the reason that these things are seen as bad is not because they're actually bad. And it's kind of like one of those things where, like, the law of the land is the law, but what happens when the law of the land literally goes against what God is saying in Genesis?
What happens if the law of the land becomes redundant or has used its use-by date? Do you think the creator of the universe, the being of all things, lets its creation hang? No, of course not. It reforms and throws an outmoded law and introduces a new one. And this was at least the original vision of Judaism when you had this tradition of this prophetological tradition of these prophets coming and amending, augmenting, interpreting the law. And that, but once the rabbinic tradition kind of established itself from the exilic period onwards, after the temple is destroyed, they take the upper hand and then they completely stifle, and put the lid on the prophetic tradition. But, I'm with Heschel on this question. I think these doors need to be reopened. And I think people like you are in a very advantageous position to bring several things back at once. Bring the tradition of the prophets back and also bring the Asherah back, full force.
Yeah, it's like, and see, this is the thing that, like, it just really pops out to me, that there's condemnation of Asherah poles. There's not actually condemnation of Asherah herself. So it's like, it's almost like the Find It, Tell a Rod, how there was this temple that was deliberately covered up. It was hidden. It wasn't destroyed. And we know that there were plenty of temples around this time that were destroyed under the orders of, this Reformation, which implies that the fact that this was, there's only 2 pillars there. We're not sure, but it's probably like a matzeva or like this where they were burning resins or incense on. And so on the larger one, they found frankincense. On the smaller one, they found cannabis. But these were covered up. Like the fact that they weren't destroyed or that they didn't, reuse these materials elsewhere, that shows that they were respecting this location, even though it was. And again, why that happened, it could have been someone who was ordered to do something, but they were like, okay, well, they won't know if it's not actually destroyed under all this rubble. It's at the end of the day, we can't know for certain. But it's just, to me, it's very clear that it was a power grab. It was a coup by the Yahwist priesthood when they realized that the king was completely malleable. They basically groomed him to be a Yahwist and to reject all the other gods or the concepts of even Asherah. And here, actually, I had it pulled up. Yeah. Let's see, where is it? So he basically got this scroll that was given to him by one of the priests, and it says, "Oh, you've been doing all this stuff wrong. You're not supposed to do this and this and this and this." So the king stood by the pillar and solemnized the covenant before the Lord, and said they would follow the Lord and observe his commandments, his injunctions, and his laws with all their heart, soul, and fulfill all the terms of the covenant as prescribed. Then the king ordered the high priest Hilkiah, the priest of the second rank, and the guards of the threshold to bring out of the temple of the Lord all the objects made for Baal and Asherah, for this goddess. Here it says, and all the host of heaven. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron. He removed the ashes to Bethel. Now notice this. Why are they bringing these ashes to Bethel? Bethel is a holy place. Like, it's clear that even though they're getting rid of this stuff, they're still viewing it as holy within certain contexts. Then it says, so notice this, he suppressed the idolatrous priests, whom the kings of Judah had appointed to make offerings of the shrines in the towns of Judah and in the environs of Jerusalem, those who made offerings to Baal and to the sun and the moon and constellations, all the host of heaven. He brought out the image of Asherah from the house of the Lord to the Kidron Valley outside Jerusalem and burned it in the Kidron Valley. He beat it to dust and scattered its dust over the burial ground of the common people. Now, it's also interesting when you think about this connection that she has to the common people or the people of the land. Then you have he tore down the cubicles or the houses of the Kadeshim, the male prostitutes, but technically they're just like it might be some sort of priest that was involved in sexual rites, but they were priests. And the houses that were in the house of the Lord and the place where the women wove coverings for Asherah. He brought all the priests from the towns of Judah to Jerusalem and defiled the shrines where the priests had been making offerings, from Geva to Beersheba. He also demolished the shrines of the gate. Now, this is interesting because I forget if I talked to you about this, but it's very clear to me because of a few other things. But here it says, was it Sar Ha'ir? Wait, no, Joshua where is this? Oh, okay, no, here it is. Asher al, okay, Bisha'ar, wait, no, it's not there. Sorry, it's Asher Petach, Sa'ar, wait. Hase'arim, so the Se'arim that were at the opening of the Shar Yehoshua, the city of the prince of the city. So what's interesting about this is this is interpreted as the Se'arim, but if you look down further, let's see, where is it? Sa'ar, well, so it's either Sha'ar or Se'ar, but Se'arim or Se'irim is goats or even satyrs. So this might be the shrine of the satyrs rather than the shrine of the gates, which would make more sense because it interprets She'arim as gates rather than Se'arim. So the shrines of the gates are the shrines of the satyrs that were at the gate of Joshua. Like, why would it need to say the shrine of the gates that were in the gate? Like, it's a bit redundant. But let's see. Oh yeah, so there are also some comments. So Paraspera ad Astra said, "Do you think mankind being formed from dirt into the image of God is equivalent to being made into living idols of God?" I'll let you take that first.
It is equivalent to being made into living idols of God. In a sense, it is. Yeah, you can take it in that sense for sure. But what does that mean? We've got to look at it from a metaphysical perspective. Being made in the image of the divine implies sentience. That is the image, life. Right? If the divine is the all living, then sentience is its image. By projecting infinite life into the cosmos, and especially in the human, who then has the capacity to recognize that which it has created, that which created it. So in a sense, that is the case. Now, in the Bayan, for example, this is formulated in the form of the imagery of the pentagram, right? The pentagram is one of the most sacred symbols of the Bayan, and it basically takes that pentagram as a manifestation of the word Hua. Because in Arabic it's 11, right? In Hebrew it's 12, but in Arabic it's 11. Now Hua is composed of the numbers 5 and 6. So the outward form of the pentagram is 5 aspects, the inner is 6, which then becomes the Hua. So the form of the eternal human, right? Who is the Adam Kadmon, or the Hava, the Eve, the Anthropos Eve. That is the image that is eternal, in the image of the divine, which is life, right? And in that book of Genesis, that Em Kol Hai is the code to it all, of what all of this is supposed to be.
Yeah, and that's another point. Em Kol Chai is an Em Kol Chai Aval Bli Adam. It's the mother of all life, which implies Adam as well.
Yes. Exactly. And this is why that commentary that I mentioned of the second surah of the Quran by the Bab is so fascinating to me, because he literally takes the Genesis narrative and throws it on its head. So the sin of Adam is actually a sin towards Eve by not having the proper etiquette to approach his wife. That is the original sin, according to the book.
Interesting. So could you almost, I mean, the whole narrative of like it's like the Gnostic tradition of the rape of Eve, which is how you get people trying to say that Cain was, descended from the serpent. It almost seems like this idea is like it's saying that it was God rather than Adam that did this. But like what you were saying before, like what if the implication is that it was Adam? And that basically that I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't know.
I mean, we don't have to get too far into the speculation about Adam, but what it ends up doing, it turns Eve into the Redeemer, which is what that narrative in that commentary does. And then you see very strong echoes of it already in the Gnostic texts that were obviously not available to this 24-year-old Shiite antinomian in the 19th century. He was just coming up with this stuff on his own, in his own visionary revelations. So, we keep ending up at this place. So, what is to be done? What is to be done is that this entire narrative of the divine feminine in the three traditions needs to be completely reclaimed. And, like I mentioned, the place to start, at least to create a theoretical framework around this, would be the more radical Kabbalists, who already had a recognition of this and who were kind of outlining and fleshing this stuff out. Unfortunately, the Lurianic Kabbalah and the whole architecture around which it kind of framed itself has its limitations. It is a very, it's a good system. It's an interesting system, very deep and sophisticated, but it has its limitations. And if you go back to a Kabbalah before Isaac Luria and Hayam Vital, there were some wild speculations from some of these Kabbalists of Spain and Italy. And if these can be reclaimed, and then you basically expand your narrative, and then you support your narrative both by the evidence of history and also by visionary. So, that you can bring the science and the mysticism together at the same time. You can reconstruct a completely new tradition of Judaism and take it back to the original Israelite religion of what it was, then the Judaism that it became.
Yeah, and I think that's also kind of getting back to what I was talking about before, this idea of like Judaism, that it's like, I don't think that Judaism is like wrong for the way that it's done it so much as...
I accept what you're saying, but these are products of historical circumstance this time. At this particular time in history that humanity finds itself in, other things are called for. So the religion of the mitzvot, this obsession with the law, needs to go. It is not a liberating message anymore. And I think the only way that can be liberated is through the Asherah being brought back with full force within Judaism, and the focus of devosi, that bhakti. That used to exist within the Israelite religion, if that is brought back, then your tradition becomes creative, so it starts to generate understandings and laws that are necessary for the times that we're living in, rather than being frozen in the past. That was contingent on that historical experience of that.
Yeah. Like, so just to contextualize what I meant is that I think that if you would have had this embrace of this stuff before, it would have resulted in Judaism being wiped out by the church, which is why the way that, and like this idea that it was able to maintain enough. But the thing is, now that we're living in a time where, for instance, Jews aren't being killed for what they believe in. I mean, you have people who are being killed for being Jews, but it's more so because they're Jews rather than, like when you have these, these people who are like violent and they end up attacking a synagogue or whatever, it's generally not because of what Jews religiously believe in. It's because of all these conspiracy theories.
It's all the bullshit anti-Semitism that we've, had to deal with for the last 1,000 years. That's now permutated in a new form as Islamophobia. But perhaps in one sense, one can say that the Messianic age is precisely the coming back of the goddess.
And
Her
that's what I've argued. And like the thing is that I've had people basically like almost like make fun of me for trying to say that, you know, it does that if basically to give into the, you know, this patriarchal narrative is to accept that all this stuff was originated by them, but it's not. It was, you know, it was distorted, whether for good or for bad, or for good and for bad. You still like to just say that we have to throw out the baby with the bathwater is like, it completely blows my mind. But
so maybe
yeah,
it's your job. You have been put on this earth by the Spirit itself to bring this all back. You know, be the new Moses.
maybe. I mean, it's kind of like given. I try not to read into this stuff too much because it can drive someone a bit mad. But for instance, so my name Ariel, I happen to look into this. I don't know why I did, but it actually doesn't mean Lion of God, which is what I've always been taught my whole life. It actually means Lioness of God, because it's saying that the Ari of El is Asherah.
Interesting.
So I mean, like, yeah, you know, it's one of there's this idea in Judaism, and you have it in a lot of different traditions, that names have power, and it's like, you know, maybe it's one of those things where it's a chicken or the egg thing. But yeah, so with resurrection plants, though, I really think that in a lot of ways, this is what like Judaism is, and all it needs to be is exposed to the right water.
To the Amazon.
Yes.
You're watching Flora Logic. Today we're talking about desiccation-resistant plants that just don't quit.
Which is what is required if you think about it now. I mean, you look at, for example, developments in Israel right now where you have a right-wing government that is dismantling its democracy as we speak. You know, it's unfortunate, but, you know, in a sense, I think American Jews especially need to recreate themselves even beyond that failing project. And this is what more empowering template than this is there to do that precisely that very thing, to revitalize a tradition in a new context that is not even specific to one piece of real estate.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, that's already what happened with Judaism, like diasporic Judaism. The thing that, like, and this is like what really hurts me, is that like there was nothing that, like, basically the reason why, given things weren't perfect before the British, but like you, especially within this colonialist context, you have this pitting of populations against each other, whether they're, yeah. And like, I really, sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh,
no, I was just going to say that as in previous experience, for over 1,000 years, Jews and Muslims were living together in complete peace.
Yeah. And like the thing that really also just, I think, given this shouldn't be the reason why it hurts, because it hurts regardless of this. But what makes it hurt even more is that, like, when you realize that, like, strip away all the religion, these people are all related.
Yeah, they are.
Like, it's so sad. And it's like, I you know, you look, you know, 1,000 or not 1,000, you know, you look, you know, 3,000-4,000 years in the past, and people were, what they believed was not that different. Sure, they had wars, but it wasn't over those types of things. It was like any other people.
Yeah. But what's that saying again? How you destroy a family by dividing it?
Interesting. Wow. So true, though. Yeah, wow.
Anyway,
we spend a lot of time on this channel talking about.
Sorry, what?
We've been talking for 2 hours now.
Oh, wow.
I gotta start scooting along and to my living room. Yeah.
No worries, no worries.
But this has been a great conversation, and thank you very much for your invite.
Definitely, yeah. We should do this again sometime.
For sure we will. And just let me know where you upload it, and just send me a link or whatever so I can have a copy.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. I'll do that. Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much for coming on, Wahid. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.